Wonderful story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it. Shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love.
Okay, so it says Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro. Jethro's his father-in-law. And we read that Jethro is the priest of Midian. What do we know about Midian? Okay, there would be some issues later on. They would be part of the Medo-Persian Empire that would later overthrow. I guess that would be the northern tribes. At this point in time, none of that's even on the horizon yet. Are they, are they followers of God? I'll ask it like that. Okay, possibly. Where I'm getting at with this is he's referred to as the priest of Midian. What was he the priest of? Was he a priest of God? Was he a priest of something else? Do we know? And is there any information that would give us any direction, maybe? This is where we ended the last study. And you'll recall we did move forward and look at a passage later on where Jethro acknowledged that he now believed in the Hebrew God. So whatever kind of priest he is, at this point, he's not a complete believer yet. And it makes things kind of complicated. It's a complicating story because later on, he actually becomes an advisor to Moses, and he actually goes with the Israelites and is helpful in a few cases in giving them advice as to what they should do and how they should do it. And so it's a complicated scenario. However, we also need to keep in mind at this particular point in time, was there an Israel? No. Had the law been given? No. None of that we immediately think of when we think about the children of Israel is part of the story yet. And so we have to keep that in mind when we read things like this, that he possibly was a priest in the same vein that Melchizedek was a priest, or any other person at the time before God had completely revealed himself and given his law, functioned as a priest. And how had God generally dealt with people up into this point? We refer to them as patriarchs, the heads of the families. We know, basically all we know is what's revealed. And so we know that God spoke to Abraham, and that God spoke to Isaac, and that God spoke to Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. These are his children, now 400 years later. They haven't talked to God, as far as we know, for 400 years. Yes. There may be. Yep. And that's, again, what we're not told is that how God engaged with any of those people. We're not told that. So what do we need to do when we're not told something? Did everybody hear his answer? It was a good answer. He said, be quiet. When we're not told something, we might look for clues and pick up on things and draw some inferences, but unless those inferences are absolutely required, we should recognize that they are not God's word. And therefore, such conclusions don't hold a place. And that's an important lesson to learn. Jethro does become somewhat important to the story. It's why he's named. There's a whole lot of people that are not named because they're not part of the story. And it's good to see you here tonight, by the way. Wasn't expecting you till Sunday. Angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. What is the angel of the Lord? I'm sorry? Okay, you could. Personally, I believe that when that phrase, the angel of the Lord, is used in the Old Testament, it almost always has a reference to a pre-incarnate Jesus. But what we really need to understand is the word angel means what? Messenger. So this is someone who was sent to speak for the Lord. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. That seems kind of odd, but there's something unique about this. And what the purpose of it is to do what? Get his attention. Listen to what it says. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. That got his attention. This was not usual. This was something that was unnatural. So it says, Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Okay, why take his sandals off? Okay. That is what God said to do. It's not unique to this circumstance. If you want to keep your finger here, jump up to Joshua 5 for a second. We'll pick up, let's see, around verse 13. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, Are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, What does my Lord say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. Now, both of these things are interesting. The one in Joshua gives us a little bit more insight into this personage. When Joshua offers him worship, what does he do? He accepts it. In other places where we're told that the heavenly angels were worshiped, like the book of Revelation, when John fell to worship the angel that was speaking to him, what did the angel say? Get up. I'm a servant just like you. That's not what this individual did. And so He's referred to as Lord as well. He accepts that title. The implication would be that this also was an appearance of the Lord. We do know for a fact that the Lord, who would be with us in the flesh, did go with the children of Israel throughout the wilderness and supply them with water and with bread, because of what we're told in 1 Corinthians regarding those things. Now, about to take your sandals off your feet, why would that be appropriate? This is just a suggestion that someone has made. It's an interesting thing. If you turn to the book of Luke real quick, around verse 22, we're in the middle of the prodigal son story. Now, the prodigal has left his father's house. Chapter 15. The son's left the father's house. He has become a servant of the pigs. He's found himself in the sty. He decides he wants to go home. And in going home, he says, what? I'll be my father's servant. Verse 22 says this, but the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand. That, of course, was the family signet ring. And shoes on his feet. What was suggested about this is that it was not uncommon for slaves to go barefoot. And that having shoes was an indication of position and authority. And taking your shoes off, therefore, would be an indication of what? Subjection and submission. And that is a suggestion as to why the demand, take your sandals off. In other words, you're in the presence of God. Show respect. Now, there are still cultures that to this day will not go into their homes without doing what? Taking their shoes off. And there's still people that live among us who carry that custom on, although usually the people that do it among us have a different reason for doing it. It's not because of the respect that they're showing their house, it's because they don't want to get it dirty. But anyway, whatever is the genesis of this, it's an interesting thing that each time there's an encounter like this, we see this kind of a dynamic being played out, where the individual being spoken to is basically being told that they need to acknowledge that they are what? In the presence of greatness. That they are a servant. They're the slave in this relationship. So he says, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place which you're standing is holy ground. He also said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. So in other words, God's message is what? This ought to be a comforting message, by the way. Okay, how long have they been in captivity? 400 years, roughly. For 400 years, they have been slaves. For 400 years, they have had taskmasters over them. For 400 years, they have been subjugated because the people who had subjugated them were afraid of them and wanted to keep them down. What was happening to their children? They were being killed. Their male children were being killed to control their population and to keep them submissive. To learn that God is watching, that they weren't in fact alone. Has to be in the middle of trial, in the middle of difficulty, in the middle of turmoil. What do we think?
Here, and then he's aloof, sensitive, what's from the field.
That he's forsaken us. We talk about the place that we're at. If it's a rough terrain and it's not hospitable to life, we call it a what? A God-forsaken place. Had God forsaken his children? Had he forgotten the promise he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? No. And that's what we're being told. I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Now, he had talked to them in 400 years. Did that mean that he had deserted them? By the way, this is sort of a shadow, because there's another period of time. There's another period of time where he goes 400 years of silence, and then his messenger comes. When is that? Between the testaments. Yes.
I think the 400 years, it's a lot of generations. The Mayflower was 400 years ago. So you think about the Mayflower landing in this country up until today, somewhere around this time, there was no hope for people. I'm just using that as
Right. Yeah, exactly. I agree. But we got to be careful. We can't say there was no hope
in their mind.
in their mind.
Because if you got 30, 40 generations within that time, we the last generation of that time, let's say. So we hit this time, just using that as an analogy. So we can understand what 400 years looks like in modern time. That was before this country was established up until now. So if you go 400 years with a taskmaster, you would lose hope. You would lose. So I'm not saying that people was right for doing that, but in perspective, in a reality, that's a long time.
I'm not going to make a judgment on those people because I don't know what I would do if the only thing I ever knew was bondage and slavery and no word from God. I'm fairly comfortable. I mean, they knew that God existed. He heard their cries. Of course, it doesn't say he heard them crying to him, their prayers to him. And this is the significant part about this. Listen to what he's saying. Listen to what he's saying. I am the God of Abraham. I'm the God of Isaac. I'm the God of Jacob. He presumes that Moses has heard of all of these people and understands his connection to them. And I presume understands the promise that was made. And he says, I have surely seen the affliction of my people. He calls them his people.
Number one, it's compassion. Number two, his time schedule is not our time.
Absolutely. And the 400 years of waiting and the 400 years of bondage may not have been in the best interest of any individual who experienced it, but was in the best interest of mankind. It was for something. And what did Joseph come to understand about his slavery and bondage? He said, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. So all this stuff that I went through in my lifetime that most people would count as being evil actually was for the good. There was something at the end of it that God was moving to. There was a reason for it. I think the same thing is being expressed here, is that there is a reason for this. I'm watching. I've seen you. And that language is even past tense. Not I see you, but I've seen you. I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. So he sees and he's aware. This has underpinnings in his omniscience. It has underpinnings in his omnipresence. Where can we go to hide from God? Is there a God-forsaken place? No. Surely Egypt, in 400 years of bondage, is a place that God has left. And the answer to that is no. I've seen and I am aware. And don't mistake my patience for inactivity. That's another theme that would pop up later on in the New Testament with 1 Peter, when he wrote and said, don't mistake the patience of the Lord for inactivity or the fact that God isn't going to do what he promised, but in fact, he's faithful, and he'll do exactly what he said. And so the promise to Abraham, let's refresh our minds. What was that promise? That was a long time ago. That was back like in Genesis chapter 11 or 12 or somewhere around in there. What was that promise? There were two levels to it. First off, he said, your offspring are going to be numbered as great as the stars or the dust of the ground. Now, keep in mind, 400 years of their male children being tossed into the Nile River doesn't really end up with our numbers being like the numbers of the stars. The second level was he took Abraham when he was in the promised land and said, look around, look as far as you can to the north, as far as you can to the south, to the east, to the west. All of this land will belong to your descendants. What did they possess at this point in time? Nothing. They had no possessions. They had been in bondage for 400 years. Yes. Yeah, it's 430, I think. I said around. The round figure is 400. Had he forgotten his promise? No. So I've come down, he says in verse 8, to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians, to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Amorite and the Perizzite and the Havite and the Jebusite. And now, behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come up to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression from which the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore, come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh. And just right here is where things start getting interesting. Because Moses had already proven himself a champion for the Hebrews, right? He had already come to the defense of the Hebrews at a time where he could have just washed his hands of the Hebrews and lived as a royal among the Egyptians. He, in fact, defended the helpless Hebrew. Up to this point, this is all good news. Hey, wait a minute. God is still around. God is still aware. God is still listening. And now God is going into action. This is great. And then God says, here's my plan. You need to go to Egypt. And right there, Moses says, well, hold on. I'm with you all the way up until this point. But why me? Yes, he was raised by his own mother. Fed and weaned by his mother. He recognized his association with the Hebrews. That's why he defended the Hebrew who was harmed. so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. Now, by the way, there's a lot of things. The word providence is never used in this, but the providence of God is all over this. Moses is in a very unique position to do this work. Moses has been educated. He's been raised in Pharaoh's house. He knows Pharaoh. He's in a unique position to be the mediator, which, by the way, is also part of what makes him a type of the Christ, because Jesus is in the house of the Father. He knows the Father. He knows God. He left God and came to earth and is uniquely positioned to do what? Be the mediator between man and God. To go and make our case before the Father in heaven when he goes back to heaven. He left heaven for a while, then he returned to heaven, and he went before God and did what? Pled the case for men, whom he came to save. There's all kind of shadowing that's going on here. He's in this very unique position. He's being called upon to do something that from his birth, God has put him in the position to be uniquely qualified to do, but he doesn't know it or see it. You go to Pharaoh so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? Why me? Who am I? He said, certainly I will be with you, and this shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. You're going to go in there and you're going to get them. You're going to come back to this mountain and you're going to worship me here. I'm going to be with you. You're going to be successful. What should Moses have said at that point? Okay. What would Abraham have done? He would have gone where God told him to go. Now, there's some extenuating circumstances. Moses is a wanted man in Egypt. Now, it's been 40 years. But they probably haven't forgotten. There's a reason why he's not living in Egypt. It's not because his new accommodations are more palatial than his former accommodations when he lived in Egypt. It's not because his father-in-law is wealthier than the nation of Egypt. It's not that his father-in-law's house is better than the palace in Egypt. He's there because he's hiding. And God says, go back to Pharaoh. And he says, I don't want to go back to Pharaoh. Who am I? And God said, certainly I'll be with you. When God tells us to do something, is he going to just quit watching us and quit caring and quit fulfilling his promise? In other words, when Jesus said, lo, I am with you always, even till the end of the age, do we believe that when we are out doing the work of God, that he is with us? That's essentially what he's telling Moses, I'm going to be with you. Do we believe that God is with us? Or are we more like Moses going, who am I? I can't do that. Now we're going to start seeing some really, this almost gets comical. Moses said to God, behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel, and I shall say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what a good answer. You know what? I may get there. And when I say, hey, God sent me to you, they're going to start questioning me. They may say to me, what's his name? What shall I say to them? This is really first level, really bad argumentation. This is like him going, you know what? When I get there, they may ask me a question. I won't have the answer to it. Let's apply this to our task to go into all the world and preach the gospel. I don't go talk to that fella because he may ask me a question I don't know the answer to. That is exactly what Moses is doing here. You know what? They may ask me what your name is, and I don't know what to tell them. And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. By the way, keep in mind, this is the angel of the Lord that's talking to him from a burning bush, who I am persuaded is a pre-incarnate Jesus. And he would later in the book of John say, unless you believe that I am, you'll die in your sins. Making himself equal to God. Yeah. Yes.
There's another analogy that I think about the fall in Athens. At this time in Egypt, 400 years, if you're familiar with Egyptology, you understand that they had many gods. And the gods of Egypt ruled over Egypt, pharaohs, and over the people, and I'm sure over them as well, as far as what they only knew. Paul, when he went to Athens, was amongst the Greeks who practiced mythology as well. And they had an idol to every, idol to every god. And when he went to talk, they had to ask him, because he just made that point.
Right.
And they said, well, the God, the unknown God, I'm going to explain him to you. Now, you take that to us today, the world that we live in is Catholicism, denominationalism. They don't know the Jesus of the Church of Christ.
Agnosticism, atheism.
So we need to tell them, like Moses and Paul and us as well.
God, the God who made the world and all things in it. That's where Paul started. The God who doesn't dwell in houses made by human hands, who isn't served by us as though he needs anything, but instead gives to us life and breath and all things. Who shall I say sent me? A God that can speak to me while a bush burns and isn't consumed. And God furthermore said to Moses, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. You want to know what to tell them? Tell them that God, the God that led Abraham, the God that led Isaac, the God that led Jacob, the God that made the promise to you and carried it down, that God has sent me to you. God is starting the process to fulfill his promise. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. Here is the first message of God and the first prophet of God sent to these people. And the very first message is what? I am concerned about you and what's been done to you. So I said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Amorite and the Perizzite and the Havite and the Jebusite, to a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will pay heed to what you say. And you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness, that we might sacrifice to the Lord our God. Now, this is kind of a big ask, by the way. But the ask is to go to the king and say, hey, let us travel for 3 days away from here, out away from people, away from everybody, into the wilderness, and we're going to worship the God out there. Worship God out there. But, he says, I know that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go. except under compulsion. So we're dealing with God who knows the end from the beginning. He says, I know that Pharaoh's not going to allow you to go until I force him. So he's telling Moses from the beginning that this task is not going to be easy. It's not going to be you waltz in there, you talk to the Hebrews, and they go, oh, okay, we'll listen to you, whatever you say. And then you go out before the king, and the king goes, oh, yeah, sure, go ahead. That's not the way it's going to work. I'm going to have to compel him to let you go. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles which I shall do in the midst of it, and after that he will let you go. He doesn't give a whole lot of information other than the fact that there's going to be some miraculous things that happen to make it come to pass. I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And it shall be that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. But every woman shall ask of her neighbor, and the woman who lives in her house, articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. You will put them on your sons and daughters, and thus you will plunder the Egyptians. Not only are you going to leave, but you're going to leave carrying all of their goods with you. All you're going to have to do is ask. And they're going to give you clothes, and they're going to give you gold, and they're going to give you silver. They're going to give you everything that you need. And you're going to walk out with all of it. I don't have time to get into chapter 4 too much. But at this point, we've had the first resistance, and then the answer, and then the second slight level of resistance, and then the answer to that. And you would think that Moses at this point would go, oh, okay, you've made this more clear. You've kind of given me a map of how this thing's going to work. So I should go. But does he do that? No. You know what he starts? You know what his answer is at this point? What if? It starts with what if. Moses answered and said, what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? We do that all the time, don't we? Well, what if I go talk to that person and they get mad at me and don't like me anymore? This is my friend. I don't want to mess up my friendship. What if they don't like what I have to say? What if they disagree with me? What if they challenge me? What if? We're going to find out whether or not that's a good answer next time. Chapter 4, starting in verse 1, is where we will begin, Lord willing, in our next study. I appreciate everybody's presence and the conversation that we've enjoyed. Appreciate those that are visiting.
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story.